Hello, let's do it.
Yeah, we have a very special guest today, and our first guest, which we're super stoked on, Sarah McCord. She is a TikTok expert, and runs a values-led agency. She's an awesome human, and super excited to have her a part of the conversation.
I'm so excited to be here. It's very special to be the first guest.
We are excited to have you. And as usual, we will be off the cuff and probably make a lot of cursing mistakes, but we'll get through it together.
So a ton of things to dig into, but we're really going to keep it focused. A lot happening on this newsletter, and you should dig in and read all the things, but cannot. Just when we sent this letter, I got in my inbox. Chris doesn't preview it with me. Obviously, we've exchanged some things previously, but she sent it, and I was like, well, of course, this is the headline. Of course, this is what's happening. And I'd seen something, Sarah, that you had posted either in kind of our board chat, something like that you were doing on the video. So it's like very demure, very mindful, and it's fucking everywhere. It's everywhere. Yeah. So Chris, you want to give a little kind of overview on what you shared in the newsletter?
Yeah. I mean, I think I was just picking up on the fact that like what happened to me was that I was on LinkedIn and I'm like, what on earth is going on here? Like everyone was demure this, cutesy that. And I was like, what is happening on LinkedIn? And of course, I hadn't yet to open my TikTok of the day. So that goes to show how quickly this is moving. And I thought that was really interesting for me because normally that's not how I become aware of trends, right? Like I'm not on LinkedIn looking for things that are going viral on TikTok, at least not in a quick way. And this has really kind of taken off. But, obviously there was this post, and then the trending audio, like it just went like every trending audio goes, but I just think it's interesting how quickly it went to all the platforms, in my opinion. And I'd love to hear your take on it, Sarah, and like what you think is going on and what this means and all of those good things.
Yeah, I mean,
because I also love how you broke it down, Sarah. I love how you broke it down. Like, here's kind of the very beginning, and here's how it actually happened.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's cool to see.
There are a lot of really interesting threads to pull. So first, we can't ignore the context of all in which we live. Demure hit when Brat Summer was oversaturated. And so here you have, everyone is like so obsessed with Brat. It burns so bright, so fast that people were like, ugh, like, and I always say it's kind of like a pendulum in trends. You know what I mean? Like, we always see that, and I was kind of talking about the fact that when Alex Cooper of Call Her Daddy launched Unwell and Alex Earl was doing Hot Mess, we saw Clean Girl right alongside it. So here you have Brat, which is like young and brash and messy, really intentionally. And in the kind of fatigue of Brat, you have Demure, which historically has been, again, very cutesy, very mindful, very polished. But what's cool and what made it take off and so incredibly impactful in this moment is that the creator, Jools Lebron, is a trans woman of color. She is not a sample size. And like one of the contrasts that I like to draw is that it was, I can't remember what network it was. It might've been Netflix that pulled a demure clip from Gilmore Girls. And it was Emily Gilmore, right? It was the old money pearled grandmother saying like, look at Rory, isn't she demure? Like that's the demure. This is not your grandmother's demure, right? So when we look at trends, it's really innovative to have this trans woman of color like grab the trend, redefine the trend, make it hers. Like there's so many different forces at play. And then the other thing, Chris, you said two things that are super interesting.
Sorry, ladies, this is me. I don't even know people had voice messages anymore.
So funny. That's not demure. That's not cutesy.
No.
There are two other things here that I think are super, super, super interesting. One is that it's not just one audio. And this is a note for creators. When you have a viral audio, sometimes creators stop. Like they're like, oh my God, I created the sound. And so the first thing that I think is really cool and really interesting is that it's actually a series of sounds. One of the reasons why it's going so viral is because it's not just the initial demure sound. It's Demure in New York. It's a salad over Wingstop. It's like this whole sort of content series and universe that she created. Which I think is super interesting. And then the other thing that you brought up, and I've talked about this so much, is that a year ago, a trend would trend on TikTok for at least 2 weeks before it hit any other social media platform, and then probably another week before the traditional media covered it. And the way that that timeline has collapsed in 2024 is extraordinary. It could trend on TikTok in the morning and be on LinkedIn 12 to 24 hours later and be in the traditional media another 5 hours after that, which is amazing to see how that timeline collapsed. It was something like this too. It was all over LinkedIn almost concurrently to when it rose to fame on TikTok, which was really interesting to see.
Yeah, things are moving so quickly. I mean, I think one of the things that I'm noticing too, though, is that the backlash is happening just as quickly. So already on LinkedIn bio, she's already, I don't know if you read Rachel Carton's Substack, but she talks about how brands are already on it and like now everyone's fatigued. And like, so it's already like people having to figure out how to play with this or not play with it or just move away. Like we're done. Like, you know, it's Tuesday and that's the end of it. Like we're moving on. I don't think really we'll see brands moving on because it'll be like Starbucks posting about it 2 weeks from now because that's how that goes. But
100%.
By long approval timelines, like you're so right to bring that up, is it will kill your social media. Like we're beyond it. Like the so many weeks to approve the concept, to shoot it, to get it out. Like nobody cares by the time it hits 2 weeks or God forbid 2 months later.
Totally.
Yeah. And that's one of the things we talk a lot about is like, you got to get to market quickly with that. And there's been some examples of it that we've talked about because you want to share the thoughts.
Like Lyft has done stuff. Synergy has done stuff with Jools. Like I think people moved.
Did it first.
Right. TikTok. And I think to me, I can only guess that basically they have a slush fund of discretionary funds. They're sending and they're saying, hey, okay, this is like, you guys are really into this. Like, here's some money, and they have to throw money at it, right? And I think that's one thing. But two, it's just brands not being fearful of like just jumping in. Like you got to jump in at the 10-minute mark, not at the 2-hour mark or the 2-day mark. Okay. So yeah. I think it's interesting to see brands and like a lot of brands just working directly with Jools as a creator, but then some like, you know, obviously doing things in a different way. But I think working with her directly is like, at least what I've seen has been the most successful.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the most authentic. I mean, I couldn't be more here that for all the reasons you stated, Sarah, that Jools like created this trend. Like, I hope that's where things are going. But going back to what we talked about as far as like the crossover, it feels like I can't think of something that started on TikTok and then crossover that quickly, but also like, you know, into Instagram and on LinkedIn. Chris, kind of to your point in the newsletter, like, is that kind of a first? Is that just like, is it just the speed that it happened? Is the fact that it happened? Is this where things are going?
I think there's a couple of things that happened with the TikTok to LinkedIn crossover. One, I think that she's talking about work, right? So she's talking about going to work, or they're talking about going to work. I'm not sure how she identifies. They identify. She. And she's talking about going to work. And so obviously, like LinkedIn is a natural place for that to go, right? Like, it's like, okay, like here's work-related content for us to play with. Like, it makes sense. But I am seeing it more and more. But this is a place that I've never really seen LinkedIn be used for what I would consider a LinkedIn meme. Like, I mean, it's not really a meme, but like, it's as close as you're going to get probably to a meme. And I do think that platform is changing and how people are using it is changing. But like the cross-pollination thing, I mean, obviously we see it all the time with TikTok and Instagram, but I thought this one was particularly interesting.
I have seen the crossover, but what I've seen historically and actually like what I would coach my clients to do, so you're right, it was never direct crossover. And that's what's really interesting. And it's never been quite so fast. What it's been more of is expert commentary. So we would see a trend on TikTok and you immediately see people on LinkedIn, you know, be your sideline reporter. Be like, here's what's trending on TikTok and what's relevant and what everyone's talking about and why they can't stop talking about it and how you can incorporate it in your brand. But to your point, Chris, this idea of like actually sort of incorporating it in a meaningful way, we haven't seen it with this level of virality and immediacy before. And so that feels like a real watershed moment that you can take something sort of funny and niche, and not just be on the sidelines of the trend, but like fully 2 feet into the trend on LinkedIn, and immediately so. Feels really interesting.
Yeah, I think it feels interesting. It also was, it seemingly, knowing how LinkedIn pushes everything just like all platforms do, like they were pushing these to me. Like it was like my feed was inundated, like, and they were, obviously the algorithm is picking up on it and it's pushing it out to me in a way that previously I've not seen content be pushed in such a like a uniform fashion, right? It's not like, even when something happens on TikTok, it's not like the sideline reporters are all in my feed at one like scroll, you know? Like this was like 5 posts deep of demure, like where I was like, what is going on here?
Totally.
Yeah.
And on all of the socials, I mean, even on Instagram, where I typically literally just get advertising, I was actually getting some posts that had this on it. And it was like, you know, in the different ways on the different socials. But the fact that it was like that across the board was just like, I think, a wonderment.
It's definitely a moment because, again, it's interesting to see it track in the style of content. So we've seen that with influencers who seem to be everywhere. We've seen that with like a brand moment that seems to be everywhere. But the idea that this like very TikTok specific, very creator led moment would be showing up in its original state on so many platforms is really cool.
Yeah. Amazing. Well, is there anything else that we should take away from this, or anything you think that we should know going forward?
Ooh, I like that question a lot. I like that question a lot. It's interesting. You know, I don't know that I have a good answer for that off the cuff, to be candid with you. I think a few things are coming up for me. I think, as I said before, sort of everything is a pendulum. And so I wonder, like, whenever you look to like what's next, it's sort of like, what's sort of the counterbalance of this? Like, is there something messy that's coming after it? I think it's really cool. And again, the other watershed moment that we can't overstate is that the fact that, with the exception of some videos, but by and large, Jools herself is being so celebrated, I think seeing that is also a really cool and special and hopefully watershed moment as well.
I would agree with that. I think seeing the content that I'm seeing brands doing that is resonating, like, are having the actual creator come in and create content for them and create versions of the content for them. Like it's less about like, oh, there's this one like little like sound that she made and then she's gone. Like I think a lot about who was the name of the creator who made that like amazing like epic 50 like series of the breakup that was happening recently. Yeah. Like that was amazing, but it was like a flash in the pan, and I don't really feel like brands really figured out like how to incorporate like what was going on with that, like as well as they have done with this. And I think that that's where I'm starting to see things like brands are kind of putting it together, like, oh, we need to wrap our arms around this creator, work with this creator very quickly, but in not just like comment on it and say like how and participate in it in a way that feels more like reactionary. They're really like the successful brands are really diving in and co-creating with the creator, like to kind of build on the momentum. And I think that to me feels really different. But maybe you see that all the time.
No, oh, sorry, go.
Well, I think, Chris, one of the things we talk about is kind of the influencer-led campaigns. And I think one of the things that's interesting about this is clearly, like in the Verizon's the one that I've seen, is I think they really did kind of give her the reins. Like we've done some campaigns, and it's like you've got to choose the influencers because you're choosing them because they're right for the brand, and give them some boundaries, but like let them do them. And like that's what's going to be compelling, and that's what's going to be interesting. And it feels like that's the way that these brands have really figured out how to show up with Jools.
And I think for me, to the point that you made earlier about fatigue, what will be really interesting is to see what she does next. That's what I'm super interested in. I guess you're saying like what's next. I'm interested in where the tipping point is of like, where is it still an interesting series and where does it need to evolve and how does it evolve? And like, is she demure forever? Like, is that just like her brand and she trademarks it? And, you know, 15 years from now, she opens like a water park by calling it demure or whatever, like the appropriate thing would be. Or because clearly like she's funny and she understands viral content, is demure like season 1 and then there's a season 2. And I think that that's a really interesting question for content creators. Now, one thing that I think she's going in her favor is that she has been putting in the work on TikTok for years. And I think that's something that's really going to help her, is that she's one of those like overnight successes who's like an overnight success who's worked at it for, you know, a decade or whatever. I think that's going to help her in navigating what's next. But that, I guess, going back to the question that you'd asked me earlier that I was like, wait, I'm not ready to answer it yet. I think what's really interesting as far as what this means for the future, since she's clearly a creator who has her finger on the pulse, is like, I am interested to see, does she become a one-hit wonder, or does she, you know, sort of grow, and what does that look like?
Totally. Yeah. I mean, I think like, hopefully this is at the very least, a platform for her great success. And obviously I think she deserves it. So, yeah, for sure. I think it'll be interesting to see what she does.
I wonder too, also, one more thing I'll say, I wonder if she'll like bridge this into social advocacy, because she has been very open about the fact that she's going to use the money that she made to finish funding her transition. Like, she's extremely open about stuff like that. And that's another layer of this that I think is super compelling and super interesting, is that that would be a natural bridge.
Yeah. And talk about a pendulum swim to like everything, that the conversations around women and like not even wanting them to work. And like, you know, it's just like everybody, like, you know, gender is like obviously a hot topic button issue for politics. And I think like people are on one pendulum swing, and I'm hoping that she can ride that, because I think people are supporting her.
Yeah, I'm 100% here for season 2, 3, and 4 of Jools.
Totally. Well, thank you, Sarah.
Yeah, so appreciate it.
Thank you so much. This was so cool and fun and awesome.
Good stuff.
All right. You did well on the off-the-cuff questions, I thought. So kudos.
Thank you
you
so much. Like to listen.
Guys.